Good afternoon. Buenas tardes a todas y a todos. Welcome to the Brussels Institute for Geopolitics. My name is Elisa Diaz, and here at the Institute, I head the program on the Global South, a topic very close to the heart of our main speaker. It's a privilege to see so many of you joining us today. Due to the high number of confirmation, we have arranged an overflow room to ensure everyone can participate comfortably. We're looking forward to continue the conversation after a reception we're holding after. We would appreciate if you could please put your phones on silent. So, we are set for a unique conversation between Josep Borrell, the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, and Luuk van Middelaar, Director of the Brussels Institute for Geopolitics. I am now very glad to give the floor to Mr. Heiko Thoms, State Secretary for European and International Financial Policy at the German Federal Ministry of Finance. At BIC, we are honored to have him as chair of our board. Thank you all for being here. Bienvenidas, bienvenidos. State Secretary Thoms, you have the floor.
So, High Representative, Vice President, dear Mr. Borrell, Director of the Brussels Institute for Geopolitics, dear Luuk, ladies and gentlemen. As Chairman of the Board, it's a great honor to welcome you all to the Brussels Institute for Geopolitics today. And we are privileged to host a truly remarkable guest, Mr. Josep Borrell, High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and Vice President of the European Commission. When the outgoing Commission started its term, President von der Leyen said it was going to be a geopolitical commission. And you yourself, Mr. Borrell, you said that the EU needs to learn the language of power. 5 years on, these words ring truer than ever. Your term has been shaped by tectonic shifts in the international landscape, the Russian war of aggression, war in the Middle East, growing tensions between the US and China. These are only a few of the profound changes we have all witnessed, and they have had a real knock-on effect on the global economy, through financial channels, through trade channels. These are things, it is a reality we now have to deal with. Geopolitics and geoeconomics have clearly shaped the last Commission's term, and this has changed the EU. It has changed the way we look at the role of the European Union in the world and at the challenges that lie ahead. For too long, the EU, certainly Germany, has relied too much on others for its security. What has become crystal clear is that we as Europeans have to develop our own perspective on our security. We have to develop the tools and capacity to guarantee it. The Brussels Institute for Geopolitics is in itself a sign of this rethinking. Founded in 2022 and backed by the leaders of France, Germany, and the Netherlands, it aims to contribute France, Germany, and the Netherlands. It aims to contribute to the debate on how the EU and its member states can react to the renewed challenges I just mentioned in the areas of economic security, security policy, and many others. Over the past 2 years, we have been building the Institute step by step, and it's largely thanks to you, Luuk, that the Institute has now taken the form that we see, that we are now almost at the end of the build-up phase, I can say. Today marks the day that the Brussels Institute for Geopolitics steps a little more into the limelight. From now on, you will see a lot more of us here in Brussels, and I can tell you we are here to stay. And let me thank you again, Luuk, for everything that you have done to achieve the state that we're in now. It's great to have you as a thought leader on board and actually at the helm of the Institute. Mr. Borrell, you have played a central role in navigating the European Union through turbulent waters. Over the years, you've been a steadfast advocate for a strong, for a united Europe. You've worked tirelessly to ensure that the EU is not just a spectator, but a global actor, firm in its values and clear in its vision and ready to meet the challenges head on. You may probably not remember that, but we have discussed this almost exactly 3 years ago, you and I, on the terrace of the residence of the European Union's ambassador to Brazil in November 2021, when I served as German ambassador to Brazil. And I would like to mention this here just to illustrate my point, because I think it was praiseworthy that in such a difficult time, you came to Brazil when others didn't. It was a time when deforestation was at a record high, the pandemic was still ongoing, and first and foremost, in Brazil, we were dealing with what we would call diplomatically a very difficult partner with the Bolsonaro government. Still, you did not shy away from going to Brazil and to pursue the dialogue, to keep our values in mind, but also to have a clear vision for our interest. And I would like to say one thing very clearly. I believe that if we don't look after our own hard, real-world interests, our values will also not matter much for much longer, at least not on the global stage. As your time draws to a close, we extend our gratitude for your work in shaping European Union foreign policy during these pivotal and difficult times. And we're delighted to get the opportunity to hear both your lessons learned and also your view on the many challenges that lie ahead of the next Commission. At the Brussels Institute for Geopolitics, we aim to provide a platform for meaningful discussions and bold ideas. We believe that dialogue between policymakers, journalists, scholars, and leaders like yourself are indeed essential to understand the complexities of our times and to formulate answers. Mr. Borrell, thank you again for joining us. We're eager to hear your insights, which will all of us inspire to think big. Thank you.
Three. Welcome all once again. We're delighted to welcome you, Josep Borrell, here at the Brussels Institute for Geopolitics. Thank you. Whilst BIG or BIG may sound like an ambitious name for a think tank just out of its startup phase, as the State Secretary said, I think the HR agrees that Europe faces indeed big challenges. Our hope is that this Art Nouveau location, a turn-of-the-century Hotel van Eetvelde, may inspire us also to take a step back and think afresh and creatively about Europe's place in the world. Guests here in the room and outside are familiar with your long career in politics, of course, most recently as High Representative, also around 20 years ago as President of the European Parliament, Foreign Minister of Spain, and in fact you already entered politics in the 1970s. You were part of the first Felipe González governments. By education, you're an economist, a Stanford-trained mathematician, and an aeronautical engineer with a degree obtained in the year the Apollo reached the moon. You're also a prolific writer and thinker with a very impactful blog. And the best of your 2024 writings have, in fact, just been published in a book, which guests will find outside this room. It has the stark title, Europe in the Arc of Fire, which is indeed a far cry from the ring of friends we have known previously. Now, we're also very grateful that you join us for what, in fact, is your last public event while in office. And I hope, indeed, today will be this chance to look back and look forward. Our conversation will be followed by a short Q&A. But if you agree, let's start this conversation before zooming out with the here and now. You have been traveling relentlessly until the very last days. Over the weekend, you were in the Middle East, the G7 in Italy. So as your mandate draws to a close, we're speaking a matter of hours, even more than days. What is now on top of your mind, just to, right, today?
Well,
the boxes, or you have to move
yeah.
from your office, as you just mentioned.
I am full of boxes and full of souvenirs. But what is high in my mind today, you have to be frank, is Gaza. I think that what's happening in Middle East in general is an open wound for humanity. I was in Lebanon 3 days ago, and I don't want to be very much sensitive or sensible, but I visited a hospital of heavily burned people, which every day the hospital is full with new victims, and thanks God, at least for tonight, no more bombs. So good news, the ceasefire. But I think that the situation in the Middle East goes beyond anything that Europeans should accept. And it's going to be a big problem for us from the point of view of our credibility with the rest of the world, and also with our capacity to influence events.
And that is essential in the role you have exercised to influence events. The heart of the conversation and Europe's capacity to speak the language of power, as you called it, which is important to deal with humanitarian and diplomatic disasters like Gaza, but also more broadly. And I think we're all keen to hear from you also. In the 5 years you have had this important role, which at the outset, indeed, you already saw the challenge, maybe earlier than others, of this power dimension coming up. Whether 5 years on the EU has learned or succeeds better in using that language? And adding to that, whether, if so, it has been Gaza or perhaps more the war in Ukraine, which has acted as a catalyst for that realization and awareness.
Certainly the war in Ukraine or against Ukraine has acted as a catalyst. Some days before the war started, we published the Strategic Compass, which is a kind of a white book on European defense avant la lettre, without using this name, but it was a white book on how the Europeans have to manage their common defense. And without the war in Ukraine, certainly this strategic compass would have gone with much less interest from the wider public, from the press, from everybody. But when I said presenting the strategic compass, Europe is in danger. Well, people look at me saying, well, this is a marketing sentence in order to sell the product. Well, some days later, the war started, and nobody was convinced before the war that the war was going to start and that the war was going to continue almost 3 years later. And certainly today, everybody agrees that Europe is in danger. Which danger? Well, the danger of war. The danger of war that can drag us. Now we are not belligerent, but we are engaging a lot in this war, which is becoming a globalized war with the North Korean troops in the European border. Who could have imagined 3 years before that we were going to have North Korean troops in the European border? Fighting, not touristing.
And do you think, because indeed a lot has changed, the war was a moment of solidarity. I think it was also experienced as a European or as a continental moment also by public opinions across the EU, not only, let's say, by the eastern border states, but also as far away as well, here in Belgium, we're at the western flank, let's say, or maybe in Spain
is still more
safely tucked away behind the Pyrenees. So there was this moment of solidarity faced with danger, of concentration and action. But do you think that awakening is translating fast enough also in action, or not?
Well, we have to look at the past with the lens of today. We cannot interpret facts in the Middle Ages with the values of today. No? But I think that it was an extraordinary moment for the Europeans. The Sunday, I remember very well, when I took the phone and I started phoning my colleague to the Foreign Affairs Council, telling them, would you agree on using the money of the European Peace Facility to provide arms to Ukraine? And it was a silence on the other side of the line. And finally, in a couple of hours, everybody agreed in something that could be unthinkable some days before. And we mobilized financial resources to arm Ukraine. This was almost 3 years ago. Today, the answer would have not been the same, because unhappily today there are at least 2 member states who are no longer on board on this policy of arming Ukraine to resist an invasion, because they consider this is not the right policy. But at that moment, I remember very well, when I had the answer of my colleagues saying, okay, let's use the European Peace Facility to arm Ukraine. I asked my staff to present a proposal. Present me a proposal for a council decision. And they came with the proposal of giving 50 million euros to Ukraine.
50 million.
50. And I said, are you crazy? We are talking about a war. Do you know what does it mean, a war? Put 3 zeros behind. Put 3 zeros. And then we started taking things seriously. It was not providing ammunition to train the armed forces of an African country, with full respect to the African countries with whom we train. It was a real conventional war with lines of tanks going to Kiev and with missiles falling inside the European city, because Kiev is an European city. And then it worked remarkably, and I think it may be the best moment of my 5 years term.
So that weekend of around 25th of February, 26, 27, a few days after the start of the war, in hindsight, it's interesting. There was this European Peace Facility in that weekend, but there was action going on many fronts as well. I think there was also, at the same time, the discussion on temporary protection for refugees. The Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, brought into play the prospect of Ukraine joining the European Union. All that indeed in the space of a few days, which concentrated, as it were, and accelerated something. Back in February, well, 1,000 days ago, more or less, right? And the question, of course, is what the next steps are, also with not only the changes within the EU. You mentioned 2 dissident or reluctant, hesitant member states, but also with the changes in Washington. We enter into new territory there, which will also be for your successor and other colleagues to deal with. But are you worried when you look at that prospect?
How not? How I couldn't be worried. Certainly I am. And I know that there's going to be a retreat of the heads of state and government, together with my successor, on the first day of January, I think. An important discussion in order to have a look at which will be the European response to a possible change on the US attitude towards Ukraine. And this is the big elephant in the room. This is the question, the issue. what the Europeans will do if the new American administration is no longer supporting Ukraine. And this is the question that Ukrainians asked me when I was in Kyiv, when I was visiting the front line, from the last soldier to the president of the country. This is the question, exactly the same question that they asked me on February 2022 when I was in Donbass. I was in Donbass, and the Prime Minister of Ukraine asked me, when they will attack, are you going to support us? Are you going to support us? And at that moment, I couldn't say yes, because I was not sure. Well, the same question comes back. How much are you going to support us? I don't think anyone knows the answer.
So we will find it out when we get there. Which is indeed a worrying prospect, but probably the most we can say right now. Quickly going from the speaking the language of power.
To speak the language of power, which is a beautiful sentence, no? You need one thing, a key ingredient, which is unity.
Unity,
But
yes.
for sure. If we live in an ecosystem where decisions are taken by unanimity, you cannot speak the language of power. You cannot even speak. You cannot even open your mouth if we are not united. And if you are not united, which kind of position do you have in a moment when it requires unanimity? How many times I had to say there is not a European position on that?
Oh, this was probably one of the most frustrating parts of your job, that you could not speak when there was no unanimous position. That
well, I've been spoken nevertheless.
Well, yeah. So, but how can that work? Because I mean, the veto has been used a lot, not least by the Hungarian government.
Not only,
and some others, but so. There's frustration, a lot of frustration in many member states with yourself, because the veto mutes, in a way, indeed, the EU voice. At the same time, when you ask around, there's not much appetite to do something about it in terms of changing the rules of the treaty.
Not only changing the rules of the treaty.
Yeah, so my question is, what practical steps can then be taken to still to square the circle, to have unanimity rule and still preserve
once again,
space for action?
Once again, I'm going to be frank, because I think I can allow it to be frank on 24 hours before leaving, and much more after. But look, I would be very happy if member states were just sticking to the treaty about unanimity, because they add more requirements of unanimity than the ones required by the treaty. When the treaty doesn't require for unanimity, member states come and say, it has to be by unanimity. Why? Because we prefer. And why do they prefer? Because at the end, everybody wants to keep a veto right. That's the reality.
Well, you have pushed back a number of times. There have also been statements of 27 minus 1.
Or minus
and I know
2.
or minus 2. There are legal scholars all across EU law institutes in the EU breaking their heads over these kind of things, how that is even possible. But I think this is a...
Well, you know how many times someone told me, I've seen that there is an agreement of the European Union about such a thing, because they see in a statement. And I said, well, it's a statement of the High Representative, not of the European Union. What does it mean? Well, it means that there is a strong majority behind the High Representative, but not unanimity. And you have to look carefully to the wording to make the difference between a statement of the European Union or a statement by the European Union High Representative. When there is not unanimity, but we are close to it, 2, 3 people disagreeing, then I go out anyway, because I think there is a strong position. and I don't pretend to speak on the name of the European Union. By the way, who speaks on behalf of the European Union? This is a great question.
An old question. Huh?
Who speaks on behalf of the European Union? Many people have asked me around the world, who speaks on behalf of the European Union? And my answer is, depending on what? Yes, depending on what? And the treaty is clear about it. There is an article in the treaty who says clearly the Commission represents the European Union on the matters of their competence. And in particular, on foreign and security policy, the Commission do not represent the Union. It's said in the treaty, black over white. Mm-hmm. Do you think this is the perception of the people around the world?
No.
Then we have a problem. Then we have a problem. If people don't know who represents the Union, we have a problem. And it should be clear for everybody who represents the Union. Depends on what?
Well, on what, and let's say also at what level of government?
No, it's clear who represents the Union. We are talking about the President of the Commission, the President of the European Union Council, and the High Representative. There is no other levels.
Well, yeah, I know the levels very well, so...
you know, not others don't know.
But indeed, for the rest of the world, it remains complicated, but it's always
it is not
a matter of personality.
No, it's not so complicated. It's not so complicated. It's clear. The Commission represents the Union on the matters of its competence, and where it's not its competence, it doesn't represent the Union.
No, of course it's clear, but to make it a little bit more complicated, I think this very clear treaty was, of course, written also in a different time, when you could clearly separate, let's say, trade issues. Well, let's see, that's my side here. I'm doing trade here, I'm doing the Commission. And
that you are fully right.
And security. So this
you are fully right.
So
fully
security,
right.
that was like Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, and trade was dealing with the US, Japan, China. And now we have to talk here in the middle because everything is mixed up. Huh?
Everything is mixed up.
Discussions on...
Well, exactly, everything is mixed up. What is defense? What is foreign policy? Mm-hmm. Everything is foreign policy you want, no? Trade is foreign policy? Certainly, trade is foreign policy.
But now we have a situation where indeed the Commission Department for Trade has power on, which it has, on decreeing a policy on, let's say, tariffs for Chinese electric vehicles, EVs, which it can do, but which is at the same time in this new world also a very strategic question, which is about great power politics, the relationship between China, the US, and Europe. So it is more complicated than it used to be. So maybe, but now we're really brainstorming here in an utterly unprepared manner. It's good also to look fresh at that. And how can Europe acquire the capacity which the Americans have and the Chinese have, and to some extent the Russians as well, to bring together their trade and economic interests and views and values with their security interests, because you can no longer separate it so clearly. And I think that seems to be...
I fully agree. Things are becoming much more complicated and interlinked, and there is fuzzy borders between what is one thing and the other. No? Mm-hmm. But there are, quand même, there are things which are quite clear, no? It's clear that the situation in the Taiwan Strait, it is not a trade issue, no? The situation in Taiwan Strait is something that has to do with war and peace. Tariffs on vehicles is something closer to trade. So you can make the difference, and at the end, it's member states who decide, because we used to say trade is an exclusive competence of the European Union Commission. That's not true. Trade, at the end, is a competence of member states. The only thing is that the method of deciding is a different one. In one case is absolute majority, and the other case is unanimity. But at the end, member states decide. Look at the tariffs. The tariffs were presented, Chinese tariffs from electric cars were presented to the member states. And the decision was taken by the member states. Oh yes, the member state could have refused the proposal of the Commission. Could have.
Well, there needed to be with many member states too in this particular
I'd
case,
say
but
the method is different.
yes.
The method is different, and the required majority is different.
Yes.
In some cases, it's unanimity. And in other cases, it's very difficult to reject a proposal of the Commission. You know better than I the methods. The methods are different, but the issue is the same. The Commission presents a proposal, and the member states has to agree on it.
Well, yeah, let's see what clarifications can be found by the new leadership team and the trio, which represents Europe above all on the world
That's very
stage.
important. That's very important.
Yeah.
But I think that, as Machado said in my favorite verse, we create the path when walking.
En cheminant.
En cheminant. Les chemins n'existaient pas a priori. Les chemins est plus ou moins balisé par les traités, mais les traités ne peuvent pas saisir toute la complexité du monde. Et parfois, les traités disent une chose et puis la réalité va de notre côté. Mais quand même, il serait bon de suivre le chemin balisé par les traités.
So here we see you are a man of many languages. Indeed, and also, and I want to briefly come to that, also to your sensitivity to language, which is particularly strong. I think you not only had this phrase of Europe using the language of power, but you are also very much aware of the power of language. And here I remind guests also that back in 2020, you were one of the first EU leaders at the start of the pandemic to identify a battle of narratives which was taking place out there, and where it is really about how we frame and how we talk about events. But also, over the course of your mandate, you have gained a certain reputation, and you already have given us some of that right here, of saying things how they are. Not always to the liking of everybody within the EU institutions, but as far as I'm concerned, it was one of the reasons I have always admired your work. Because the EU has suffered, I think, for too long from a gap between rhetoric and reality. We spoke about the European Council when I was a speechwriter of the European Council President, so this is about 10 years ago. It was almost forbidden to use the word power or interest. Now that's 10 years ago, and things have changed, but still, I'm wondering also whether you still have felt these constraints. And here I'm going to be honest with our guest. Once you told me that very often it happens that your staff or your advisors, ahead of important meeting, they tell you, "Vous ne pouvez pas dire ça." You can't say that.
This is the preferred sentence of the State Election Service. Oh, no, you cannot say that.
Yeah, but I imagine that when you have a meeting with, I don't know, a minister of Lebanon or other meetings in the Middle East, this hampers your effectiveness because it means you have to say something, and so you think for yourself, of course, but...
Ça fait partie du métier. Ça fait partie du métier de la diplomatie. Hein? You have to say the truth. You have to say only the truth, but you're not obliged to say all the truth. In some cases, you don't have to say everything that you have in mind, especially if you're not being backed by the club to which you represent. Mm-hmm. In some cases, I think it's absolutely necessary to say the truth, because it's so evident, the truth, that if you don't say, people don't believe you anymore.
No, you lose credibility.
You lose credibility. For example, who can believe that today the humanitarian law and the law of war is not being respected by Israel? Who can believe it? Certainly not me.
So you say it.
I presented a report to the Council. I presented a report to the Council saying, these are the facts. According with these facts, I think that we have to take action. And
Answer?
after nothing happened because it was not enough support. But at a certain moment, it is so evident that you lose credibility if you continue denying. If you continue saying, the rule of law has to be respected. Okay, it has to be respected, but the relevant question is, it is respected or not? Because announcing for the 20th time that the law has to be respected doesn't add any kind of information to the question. The question is, it is being respected. Do you have an opinion about it? Stop saying it has to be. Say it is or it is not.
Same, I guess, for the two-state solution.
That's another example. But you say in some cases it took two risks. In some cases, definitely, it was too risky.
To say certain things.
And to do some things. For example, the State Secretary reminded that I was discussing with Bolsonaro about deforestation. By the way, this deforestation has been postponed. We were very tough 3 years ago, and now we are withdrawing. We are delaying. We are considering that our proposal was going too far or too quickly. But to discuss with Bolsonaro about deforestation was not so difficult. To go to Moscow the day that Navalny was going to be in front of the judges and to tell Lavrov what you are doing is not right was certainly much more difficult and risky than to discuss about deforestation. You agree, no?
I agree, because of also the press environment in which you operate in such trips, or because there's more at stake?
Well, certainly this trip marks a turning point in my vision of Russia and the way we approach Russia. Many people advise me not to go. Don't go, it's a trap. Don't go, it's a trap, you will be in a trap. They will treat you very badly. I was convinced that they were going to treat me very badly. But I thought that if you want to say to the Russians that Navalny judgment was completely unfair, it was a good moment to go and to tell them to the face. To tell them to the face, what you are doing now is against our values, and I criticize you, Mr. Lavrov. And you know what happened? Before entering into the press conference, Lavrov told me, are you going to talk about Navalny? Are you going to talk about Navalny? And I said, yes, obviously. I came here to talk about Navalny. Okay, if you talk about Navalny, I will talk about the Catalan independent people who are suffering the same thing that you say Navalny is suffering. I say, come on, are you joking or what? Do you really believe that what's happening in Spain, in Catalonia, can be considered the same thing that we are doing with Navalny? If you talk about Navalny, I will talk about the Catalan independent people. And that's what happened. I talk about Navalny, and he explained me the story about the Catalan repression, the Catalans being repressed by the... What could I have done? To start discussing with him about what's happening in Catalonia? Certainly not. I was not going to Moscow to discuss about it. So I repeat once and again my story about Navalny. But certainly it was not well prepared because, when we were discussing with them, at the same time, they were putting in the network the news that 6 European diplomats were going to be expelled. But we didn't know it. We knew it later.
So there was a double trap. There was the Catalan trap and the expulsion trap.
No, the expulsion of the diplomats. People told me, you didn't say anything about the diplomats being expelled. How could I say? I was not aware. They didn't tell us. They told us, no, they didn't tell us. We knew it about during the lunch. And during the lunch, I talked to Lavrov. What is this? Oh, what a pity. What a pity. It should have been announced tomorrow after you left. It has been a leak. And then I said, okay, the dinner's over. Goodbye.
And you said your words about Navalny.
Now, it was a difficult moment. Navalny is dead. Navalny is dead. That's the important thing, not what happens in this meeting. The fact is Navalny is dead, that there is no more opposition in Russia, that Putin is crushing all oppositions, that people are not aware in Russia of what's going on in Ukraine, that 70% of the Russian soldiers being killed in the front line are not conscript, but people being paid, people who goes there to win a salary, and that Russia is engaging all its economy and resources on the fight against Ukraine. This is the things that matter, not the anecdote of what's happening at that meeting or during that visit. This shows the real nature of the Putin regime. This shows the way Putin system is working. What happened to this guy who was the leader of the mercenary troops?
Prigozhin.
Prigozhin.
Yeah.
Do you remember him? What happened to him?
Well, he was
By accident. What a misfortune.
defenestration.
Exactly.
Also.
A defenestration from 10,000 meters. Yes, defenestration, that's right. Defenestration from 10,000 meters high. This is the way it works. I hope not to be defenestrated tomorrow, but it is the way it works.
Well, on Russia, you could say that it has taken time, but there seems to be, well, you mentioned a few more reluctant voices, but there is still some alignment and convergence to do more, in particular on the whole area of defense, with a view to a threat at Europe's eastern borders. And that is no longer a theoretical threat, but a real threat. And with all the action, I wanted to ask you that is going on in the field of defense as well, all the discussions within the EU, NATO. You already mentioned the billions. You yourself, in a way, you have been one of the driving forces to make Europe more defense ready with the European Peace Facility, with the initiative for shells for Ukraine, etc. But when I look at the next European Commission, I see there will also be, or we all see, there will be a defense commissioner, which maybe is a good idea, but at the same time, your own successor, Kaja Kallas, she will still be responsible, of course, as she should be, for Europe's defense and security and defense policy. She will do all the things that you have been doing, chairing the Defense Council of Ministers, heading the European Defense Agency, overseeing missions. It links a bit back to the question we had previously, whether all of this is going to be coherent in practice. So what is your view on these developments, this also institutional shifts, and do you think, because of course that's the heart of the matter, whether that helps and contributes to a stronger European defense, not least vis-à-vis Russia, or is it all, some of it distracting from the result?
We are going into uncharted waters with these questions. Look, I think we have to make an effort in order to avoid power grasp between institutions, and there is a lot of power grasp among institutions, and we should try to avoid institutional confusion, because the Commission has no competence on defense, has competence on the industry of defense, because industry is a sector of the industry. Defense industry is a sector of industry. And the entry point of the Commission into defense is competitiveness. But we have to clarify the terms. The Commissioner for Defense, in fact, he will be mainly a Commissioner for the defense industry. And I am very happy to have someone in charge of the defense industry. But on the other hand, there is a body, an organization, and the European Defense Agency, who has as a duty to do everything needed in order to boost the technological and industrial base of defense. So let's say that there are a double tasking here, no? Or two people being tasked with the same thing. With a difference, the Commission has financial resources, has a budget. The European defense industry has not a budget in order to supply directly resources to the industry. And that's why it's so important that the competitivity side and the defense side, the intergovernmental side and the community side, they work together. Otherwise, it will be an institutional confusion. Who does what?
Well, I suppose underlying that confusion is also two visions in a way on the future of defense and whether you can build a European, more united defense on, let's put it simply, a more federalist vision of the future of Europe, or whether it will be rather bringing the states together in a concerted effort to defend ourselves jointly. And I wonder also, because of course you have now this...
What does it mean by a mode of federal view of defense?
Well, I mean, that's exactly the question. But what I'm interested in also with your experience in national politics. So you know the EU inside out, but you were also a foreign minister for Spain, attending international meetings on behalf of Spain. And I remember I once had a colleague who was a French high official from the finance ministry, and she worked with me as a colleague at the European Council. And she told me that it felt very different, in a way, to sit at an international table in front of a French flag, which she had done in the past, than in front of an EU flag. I don't know whether that is, whether you also experience that difference. Did it the right
you know,
sitting in front of a Spanish flag or an EU flag?
I understand fully the question. You know, I am a European federalist. I believe in a more united Europe. And for doing that, we have to create a federal system of decision-making and implementation of policy and sharing resources. So you don't have to convince me about the need to advance on a more federative approach. But I don't know how to say in English, poner la carreta antes de los bueyes, no? You don't have to put the
La charrue avant le bœuf. I can do the French translation,
okay.
sorry.
Don't put the charrue avant le bœuf, otherwise it will not work. So I would like to be doing a lot, but you have to be aware of the constraints, the institutional constraints and the political will. You can say whatever you want. At the end, reality is reality. And defense is a matter of the military, the army of member states. Now, so you have to work with them. You cannot impose to them anything. And that's why it was created PESCO, and it was created the European Defense Agency, and it was created someone in charge of building a common security and defense policy. It is already someone in charge of doing that. The treaty says clearly that we want to build a common security and defense policy. And the one in charge of building a common security and defense policy is someone called High Representative for that. Anyone else willing to do the same thing is bound to failure, because member states will not follow.
Take note for your successor.
For my successor is clear. I hope.
Well, but for the people, indeed.
No, but it's very important to clarify this, because it's very important to understand that the army is a very serious thing. An army is a very serious thing. And you cannot create a bouclier anti-missile from the bureaucracy of Berlaymont. No, you cannot do it. You can put the money.
No anti-missile shield from the Berlaymont
No
building.
missile shield without strong engagement. And if you want to create a common defense system on anything, you have PESCO. Why don't you use the tools created by the treaty?
But then, of course, I mean, I fully agree, but at the end of the day, it's not only a matter of institutional setup, it's also about underlying...
The most important thing is political will.
Yes, and
political will and the other will follow.
Strategic convergence of
political
having a same
will
sense
and the other will
of
follow.
Danger, of priorities, of choices. And do you think there are better ways to channel that political will, or is it just going on the way we are going on? And you have worked as well to...
Well, I have to recognize one thing, that the political will through intergovernmental methods has the handicap of unanimity. Mm-hmm. If you want to take decisions through the intergovernmental making, you have unanimity. And that, as Stefano knows very well, we have been facing this problem. If we go to the European Peace Facility, at the end, I need unanimity to do everything. And then the temptation of escaping the intergovernmental approach and looking for a more community method is quite clear. I want to skip the unanimity by inventing something that doesn't obey the unanimity rule, which is the community method. But it has limits. It has limits. What we did with the Next Generation EU, calling for
pandemic funds.
Exactly, calling that an extremely extraordinary circumstances. And
once in a lifetime.
And it was an extremely extreme circumstances. People were dying, my God. People were dying. You don't have to tell that it was an existential threat, because people were dying. But to say that once again is an existential threat, it's not going to be so evident.
Well, I guess because the breakthrough of these pandemic funds was that there was joint borrowing. I think the discussion on defense bonds is gaining traction, and that...
Are you sure?
Well, of course, it will depend on political situation, in particular in Germany, but if I talk
I am very much in favor of issuing defense bonds, because I know that it's not going to be enough. But if we want to use the same article of the treaty that we use for the Next Generation EU, to call for an extremely extraordinary and existential problem, some people will say it's not the case. It's not the case. It's not so existential. It's not so evident that we are risking our lives.
And in a way...
some people will say that.
In a way, it's also not exceptional, because it will be permanent. We are entering...
Exactly, it's going to be
entering
permanent.
Into a new historic epoch, in
a way. But what do you want to finance with these bonds? What do you want to finance? We issue bonds, for what?
Well, to be able to defend ourselves.
It's just tautologic. Go deeper.
Well, one question is whether it's about financing Ukraine to defend itself. Or
that's another thing. That's another.
No.
That's another thing. That's another thing. To support the help to Ukraine is another thing. This is not a European defense. If you want to support Ukraine and you want to issue bonds, by the way, we already did it. We went for a loan in the market. We asked for capital in the market, 50 billion. Part of it is going to be financed by us. So we have already issued common debt. We can go deeper, and we can call for a debt issue in order to buy more arms for Ukraine. And maybe maybe this question will be put on the table. Do you want to support more Ukraine quickly? Where are the money? We don't have it. Issue bonds. But this is one thing. Another thing could be to boost the capacity of our industrial sector. And then you will start discussing who benefits from it, who has an industrial sector, where the money is going to go. Mm-hmm. And you can imagine a third purpose, which is to arm the armies of the European Union member states. And on that, I heard the German Chancellor saying, no way, I'm not going to pay to arm the armies of others. Each one has to pay for their own armies because defense is a national responsibility. Defense is a competence of member states. I will not pay for it. I heard him saying that several times. So there are three issues: to arm Ukraine, to boost our industrial capacity, or to increase the equipment of our armies. There are three different things. What are you talking about?
Well, between the last two, there's often also a contradiction. Huh? Where do we spend when we spend money on buying weapons? Is that, to put it clearly, to buy American weapons so they stay in Europe? I put it as a bit of a shortcut, but to placate Washington to linger on a little more as our protector, which is one view very strong in Europe, and another view is, yes, we need our own defense industry. And that
we need our defense industry.
But that debate is I think, hardly explicit. Huh? Everybody knows it's out there, but it is not, people do not have it in these terms. In particular between, let's call a spade, between Germany and France. These are two diametrically
yes and not. Yes and not.
Good.
Yes and not. We need a strong defense industry. We need, certainly, we have been going into a process of disarmament and reducing our capacity to produce arms, from the humble ammunition for a gun to the most sophisticated drone or the most sophisticated fighter. We don't have the capacity we need. And I know very well because I've been begging, produce ammunition, and I took I don't know how many months to ask for 1 million ammunitions. 1 million ammunitions. You know how many shots Russia is shooting every month? Every month, 800,000. Every month, they use the same amount that we have given in a whole year. So we have to produce more. And we are producing more. We are producing more. From the humble bullet for a cannon to the most sophisticated fighter. We cannot replace the American production of fighters overnight. We don't have the capacity to substitute all F-35.
No, but we should start, of course.
Let's start quickly. Yes, let's start. But in the meantime, things are the way they are. And another thing, when you buy an F-35, you are buying also a security commitment. You are not only buying a fighter. You are buying a fighter, and you have a kind of a
package.
Exactly, and people know very well. And when you buy a F-35, it's a different thing than buying another. So we have to develop our capacity. Certainly we have. But in the meantime, things are the way they are. And you need to rely on the American capacity to export. And by the way, this figure of 80% of imports,
yes.
I am sorry to say, I've been saying things which are not correct. When I've been saying that since the beginning of the war, we have imported 85% of all our equipment, the figure is incorrect. I've been doing research on that.
What, it's worse? Or?
And it's about 45.
Okay.
But it's important to know, because 45 is one thing and 85 is another thing. And you have a completely distorted picture of reality if you continue saying that we are depending 85% of the industrial capacity of others. It seems that it's not true. It seems. according with the research I could do.
So the picture is less bleak then.
Yes, but you cannot pretend to be autonomous and produce all your military warfare. Who is the strongest?
It's the same on our energy imports. Collectively, it's around the same number. 45 or around a bit under 50% of all our energy we import from outside Europe into Europe.
And maybe it's not this is not the most dangerous dependency. Maybe the most dangerous dependency is the critical material that we need for the digital revolution. But nobody's talking a lot about it. It's no longer gas and oil. It's the rare minerals that we don't have neither, and most of them come from China or from the mines in Latin America who are on the hands of Chinese firms.
Well, I think also the commission of which you were vice president has, and you also as HR have worked hard on establishing these relationships with Latin America, with the Global Gateway as one vehicle of establishing these partnerships. But of course.
But you know, I went to the triangles of lithium, the triangle of lithium between Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, where most of the lithium is being produced. All the firms there are Chinese, all. And I was asking, there's no European firm here? It was one, but he had to close because they didn't find financing because mining was considered something that doesn't deserve to be financed. So we have to change a little bit our mindset with respect, for example, to financing the defense. Until now, financing defense was something considered, well, come on, don't do this kind of dirty things. No?
No, I'm very pleased to see that after 5 years in office, you still have the same energy and drive to change things.
And that's nothing with what is coming.
Well, we're looking forward to that. So maybe let me conclude with a big question on a bit zooming out, because you have also the immense advantage of experience and of overseeing numerous decades. You were born during the right after the war, the 1945. As I mentioned, you got an aero space nautical diploma during the Cold War space race. You have experienced the democratic transition in Spain, and now as in your role as High Representative, you have experience with the European Union that again we enter into a new epoch to some extent with war, global crises, etc. And that definitely what we used to call the post-Cold War era is over. So we're now a little bit disoriented.
And
some people say
we don't have to embark on a new one.
No, rather not. But that is, of course, one scenario.
One was enough.
2.0, which is...
Let's try to avoid the scenario of another Cold War.
And how, I mean, that is maybe the most pressing question. What qualities, what strengths and what virtues can Europe mobilize in this age to navigate that course, and to the extent we have agency as Europe,
we
which
have
I think
a lot. We have a lot.
What is your view on how? We're here together. You have 24 hours to go. The world order. How will it?
The world order has to be fully managed, fully rearranged. It is easy said than done, but it has to be fully rearranged. People around the world don't accept the world order the way it was designed in 45. In 45, China didn't exist. No. I am coming from the G7 meeting, and I met there with the foreign ministers of the Southeast Asia. Japan, Korea, Indonesia, Philippines. All these countries on 45, they were on their knees. Japan were on their knees, and the others were asking. And they were asking, not jump atomic bomb, please. And the others were colonies. Indonesia, by the way. The other were colonies, or they were one people. Today, it's impossible to tell them that the world order has to be the same as in 45. It's impossible for them to accept it, and they will not accept it. China in particular, but Indonesia neither. So Korea, a small country, but do you know the capacity, the industrial capacity, political influence that Korea has today? Just arms supplier? To whom Poland is buying arms? To South Korea. So the whole architecture has to be changed. And then comes the war in the Middle East. And it also will have to change the whole architecture. And the Arabs were in the G7 meeting also, and they were not very happy with us. So the world order has to be rethink and rebuilt, like it or not, for sure. And that I am completely sure. And we are not interested in being dragged against a total confrontation with China. I try to avoid it. I know that maybe the new, well, in the US, the position with respect to China is a bipartisan. Both parties are more or less on the same mood. But maybe Trump is in a stronger mood, no? Just imagine 60% tariff on China.
Well, the advantage of Trump is maybe one of his few advantages that he is also ambiguous on this, because he can be he wants to win, but he can also be in a more pragmatic mode, and he's not so ideologically driven, maybe as...
You say that Trump is not ideologically driven?
In a different manner, I think, than the... many, including in his own party. He is not a hawk in the same way that, or at least he has a hawk in his head, but he also has a more pragmatic deal maker. But that's what I think will...
I am not ready to analyze the degree of schizophrenia of Mr. Trump, but what can I say? No, I wouldn't say that Trump is not that doesn't have an ideological approach to the world. Certainly it has. It's not the classical ideological difference between social democrats and liberals and conservatives in Europe, but it has an ideological approach to the world. Certainly it has. No, it's a different parameters, a different approach, but at the end it's a tough ideological approach. And talking about ideology, now I realize that I am the last survivor of the Spanish socialists who managed the transition. I am the last survivor of the people who were a part of the socialist government with Felipe González. I am the last one. I am the last one. I was having a look at the list, and they say all them are either retired or dead, which is the definite way of being retired. So, but they are no longer active in politics. No one. I am the last one. And maybe it's time for me also to get retired. And this is my last political event, and I thank you a lot for giving me the opportunity.
Well, we thank you. We are really honored for having you with us for this last event. Again, you have impressed us with your insights, your independence of thought. And while we may see less of you here in Brussels in the near future, we do hope that your voice will remain as strong and critical as it has been.
And constructive also.
And constructive, yes. And for that, as a small token of gratitude on behalf of the Institute, I just want to present you, it's not a book, nothing to read, a notebook, empty pages. Maybe you don't have plans, but I think we would all be very interested to continue either listening to you or reading you for your memoirs.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being with us this moment. Now I can turn to the room for a final 10 minutes of 2 or 3 questions. There's a light here. I see a gentleman. I see there a lady in the middle. Please, if you stand up, say your name and your affiliation.
My name is Selen Morenka. I work for Turkish news agency Anadolu. So I'm a Turkish
Please take
journalist in Brussels.
the mic, please.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm a Turkish journalist in Brussels. I have been following you very closely. And for Turkish public, you have been the conscience and the good heart of Europe. So thank you for all the remarks you have made. And my question is about, if I make two questions quickly, one is about Gaza. Your first remark here was about Gaza, and today you called for two-state solution, and also you made a last call to the EU member states to obey with the ICC ruling. So you just said that who believes that Israel is obeying the international law, and you said you certainly don't believe. So I just want to ask, why do those states, EU member states, that do not act like Spain or Ireland, do you think they believe that Israel is really obeying the international law? If not, what is the reason of their different approach than Spain, Ireland, Belgium, Slovenia, let me say? Do you think it has something to do with the historical debt they feel to the Jewish nation?
That's one question. That's a good, very good question. Yes.
You
want to take it now or take all three of them?
Can you explain me the question? I didn't hear very well about why the others don't
Why
say.
not all EU nations have the position of, for instance, Ireland and Spain in recognizing the Palestinian state, and where you see the role of history there?
Certainly, it plays a very important role. My German colleagues say all the time, for us to support the state of Israel, c'est une raison d'État. We have to support Israel because Israel, what happened in the Holocaust, others don't have this feeling. Spain does have this feeling. Ireland neither, Belgium, but the idea that some member state of the European Union has a kind of a duty to protect Israel and to be ready to understand their behavior. I understand culture and history matters, but I think things has to be judged on themselves. Mm-hmm. Facts are facts. Mm-hmm. Facts are facts. You cannot deny facts. And yes, maybe you are guilty because you did with the Jews, but believe me, the Palestinians are not responsible for that. It's not the fault of Palestinians. You have a problem with your history, try to solve it, but don't make the others pay for it. I'm sorry to say that so bluntly, but it is so dramatic what's happening. It's so terrible what's happening that I think that we can, and I understand, I am fully supportive of the State of Israel. I am fully supportive of the State of Israel. I have to say 100 times, but I think what's happening, it is not good for Israel itself. It's not good for the survival of the idea. And then, we have to make a difference between a state, government, and a people. Huh? It's not the same thing Spain with Franco than Spain with González. And it's not the same thing Israel with Netanyahu and Israel with Shimon Peres. It's not the same thing. I'm sorry. It's not the same thing with Smotrich, that they wanted to be sanctioned by the European Union without managing to happen. It's not the same thing, the ideas of Smotrich, than the ideas of other people in Israel who are fighting for peace. So we have to not to make an amalgam between the state and a government, because otherwise we don't understand what we are talking about. Netanyahu is a government, Israel is a state, and a people.
There's two more questions. I'll take both of them. Gentleman on the side, and then gentleman in the back.
Hello, my name is Yusuf Ramadan, and I work at ODI Europe, and I'm a graduate of the College of Europe. I want to thank you very much for being here with us today. And actually my question is, how would you say the best way to support the Palestinian people, especially in the rising wave of Islamophobic, racist, and anti-Palestinian rhetoric and narrative in European politics? And thank you very much.
And the second question, the gentleman in the back.
Well,
the best way to protect Palestinian people.
Protect the Palestinians.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Eric Maurice from the EPC, the European Policy Center. Thank you for explaining the competence of the Commission and what it means compared to the member states. And actually, I think it's interesting that your last day, it's because it's the last day of the Commission tomorrow. And when we read the treaty, if I'm not mistaken, it's about the High Representative who is also a Vice President of the Commission, but in reality, it seems there is a tendency to have a Vice President of the Commission who is also High Representative. And when we read the mission letter for your successor, she has to report directly to the President on many issues. So is that your experience of being considered more as a Vice President of the Commission with one President of the Commission? And how was it to work for both the President of the Commission and the Member States? It's your last day, so you can be honest.
Hey, huh? I hope not to be this frustrated when I go. It's not my last day, and believe me, I am going to get retired from the front line, but I think I have a duty of memory. I think I have a duty of memory. I think I have to try to write how I perceive the events of these years. And I think that we are going in a contrary direction of what was willing by the Lisbon Treaty. On the Lisbon Treaty, people who wrote the Lisbon Treaty, and I was part of the convention who wrote the Constitution, saw very clearly that it was a duality between the Commission and the Council. They were a commissioner for external relations and a high representative of the Council for external relations. And they said, okay, we are going to merge it. And on security and defense, we can say the same thing. There is a governmental branch and a community branch. And the idea of the Lisbon Treaty was to merge it and to put someone having the capacity of acting from the Commission as a Vice President and from the Council as chairing the Council. And I think that we are going on the contrary direction, once again creating dualities, once again creating bodies which are sharing competences in a manner that could create less cooperation between the Council and the Commission. And this is not going to be very productive. I think that if we want to be cooperative, we have to create the institutional setting in order to make cooperation effective. And that's what I think we have to work with, because otherwise the European Union will be spending too much work, too much effort, too much political will on internal issues, instead of having a strong capacity to act outside. And when you said the language of power, the European Union was created, the European community at the beginning was created against the idea of power. It was created from renouncing to power, because we abuse so much of power that we said, no more power. No, let's forget about power. Trade, rule of law, instead of power. And when I wanted to create the rapid deployment capacity, why this strange name, rapid deployment capacity? Because when I put the right name, rapid deployment force, member states said, force? Force, you said force, you want to use force. No way. We don't use force. And then what do we call it? Oh, rapid deployment capacity. Capacity of what? Capacity of what? Of using force. Wait, but we don't say that. No. We were built against the idea of power. And now we realize that you have to have power. You have to have power. Not necessarily military power, but power. And use it. And we have powers. We have many more powers than the ones we are ready to use. Because to use, we need unity. And once again, the foundational issue of the institutions are the willingness to use our capacities together. This is the real problem. And this has to have a political solution. And the political solution has to be found at the level of the European societies, at the level of people. We live in a democratic system, and we cannot act against the will of the people. And people have to be convinced of what we are doing. And when my gardener, the other day in Madrid, he asked me, hey, High Rep, well, he doesn't call me High Rep, but he told me, why should I continue paying for Ukraine? By the way, where is Ukraine? He doesn't know where Ukraine is. Why should I continue paying for Ukraine? Taxes are high, electricity bills are high, and we pay a lot of money for these people. Why should do? And this is the question that the leaders have to explain to the European people. Why should we continue paying and supporting Ukraine? Why? Not how. Why? How come later? The important thing is why. And this question is not being answered, Maria Luuk. It's not being answered. And the far right and the far left are telling to the people, stop supporting Ukraine.
Hence the importance
of democracy. Hence the importance of democracy. Hence the importance of democracy, the public debate. Actually presenting people the reason for doing something or not doing something. And that is the same thing for everything you want to discuss about. Be Middle East, be Ukraine, be the relationship with China, be everything that matters is an issue of making people understand which are the challenges we are facing.
Please continue with that work also from the 1st of December. Thank you so much, Josep Borrell.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.